My world began and ended with the rise and fall of the Georgia sun. It was a world measured in rows of cotton, in the ache of your back, and the weight of a name that wasn't your own. They called me Elias. It was a name given, not chosen, a label on property. I was born in 1825 on the Blackwood Manor plantation, a sprawling kingdom of white columns and black despair, ruled by Master Thomas Blackwood. My first real memory isn't of my mother's smile or the taste of cornbread. It's the sound of a machine breaking. The cotton gin, the plantation's metal heart, had seized. The overseer, a man named Miller, whose cruelty was as predictable as the sunrise, was whipping the man who operated it. I was 5 years old, hiding behind a water barrel, and in that moment, I didn't just see a man being beaten. I saw a system, a flawed, brutal, inefficient system. The man was being punished for the failure of the machine. The machine was the real master, and we were just the replaceable parts. That's when the first seed of an idea was planted in my mind. What if a part could learn to think for itself? My mother, Sarah, was a house slave. This gave her a proximity to power that was both a blessing and a curse. She moved through the great house like a ghost, her face a mask of serene obedience, but her eyes missed nothing. At night, in the stifling heat of our one-room cabin, she would shed that mask. It was there, in the dark, that she gave me my true inheritance. It wasn't land or gold, it was memory. She would whisper stories of her grandmother, an Igbo woman stolen from a land where the sun was hotter and the gods had different names. She taught me songs, not the ones we sang in the fields for the master's benefit, but older, deeper songs. Melodies that carried coded maps of sorrow and hope. "Follow the drinking gourd," she'd hum, her voice a thread of moonlight in the darkness, and she'd point a finger to the night sky. I didn't understand then that she was teaching me the way to freedom. I just knew it was our secret. My father was a phantom, a name whispered, a man sold down the river to Louisiana before I could walk. His absence was a hole in our family, a constant, silent reminder of our powerlessness. Every time a wagon of strangers rolled up the long dirt drive to the manor, a cold dread would settle in my stomach. It was the dread of the auction block, the terror of separation. I saw it happen to the Johnsons, whose boy Samuel was my only friend. He was sold to a trader from Tennessee. I remember the sound his mother made, a sound that wasn't human, as he was dragged away. We never saw him again. I was 7. That night I promised myself, in the silent language of a child's heart, that they would never take me from my mother. I would find a way out. My childhood was a duality. By day, I was a water boy, then a field hand, learning the brutal rhythm of planting and picking. The sun was a hammer. The cotton bolls were tiny razors that tore at your fingertips until they were numb and bloody. We moved as one, a human tide flowing through the white fields, our sweat watering the master's profits. But in the slivers of time that were my own, in the shadows and the late hours, I was someone else. I was a watcher, a learner. I was fascinated by how things worked. A broken wagon wheel, a loose hinge on a barn door, the complex gears of the dreaded cotton gin. While others saw junk, I saw puzzles. I'd sneak away to the scrap pile behind the blacksmith shop, collecting bits of metal and wood, hiding them under a loose floorboard in our cabin. The overseer, Miller, noticed my curiosity, but he didn't see intellect. He saw a potential asset. "The boy's got a knack," he told the master, "might be useful." So, instead of the fields, I was sometimes assigned to the blacksmith, a burly, quiet slave named Jacob. He was a master of his craft, shaping raw iron into tools and chains with a strength that seemed to come from the earth itself. He never spoke much, but he let me watch. He let me learn. I learned the language of fire and metal. I learned how to mend, how to shape, how to build. And in secret I began sketching on scraps of bark with bits of charcoal. I drew the world not as it was, but as it could be. My obsession became the cotton gin. I saw its violence, its inefficiency, and I started to design something better, a machine that could do the work faster, cleaner, without tearing the fibers or the hands of the person feeding it. It was a dangerous thought, the genesis of my secret cotton machine. To them, I was just a clever tool, a potential slave inventor who could save them money. They had no idea I was designing the very instrument of my own liberation. The idea of being free, of being a man who owned his own mind and his own labor, of one day being a millionaire. Off my own creation was a fantasy as distant as the North Star. But a fantasy can be a powerful thing. It can be the first step on a long road. And my journey had just begun. My mother found my sketches one night. Her eyes, usually so full of weary strength, widened with a terror I had never seen before. "Elias, you must burn these," she whispered, her hands trembling. "If they find this, if they find out what you're thinking." She didn't have to finish. We both knew the price of ambition for a slave. It was the whip, the branding iron, the auction block. But I couldn't. I looked at her, at the lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, and I saw the generations of stolen lives she carried. "This is how we get out, Mama," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Not just us, but maybe others too." The idea of a slave inventor creating a secret cotton machine wasn't just about escape, it was about proving them wrong. Proving that the minds they tried to crush were capable of brilliance. It was a dream of justice, a dream that might one day make us not just free, but wealthy, a millionaire even. A word so foreign it felt like a prayer. She looked at me for a long time, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Then slowly she nodded. She understood. This was my fight, my form of resistance, and she would protect my secret even if it terrified her. In the silence of our cabin, surrounded by the ghosts of our ancestors and the sounds of the sleeping plantation, my resolve hardened like Jacob's steel. I would build my machine, and it would set me free. The years between 10 and 20 are a crucible for any young man, but for me, they were a secret war fought on two fronts. The first was the daily battle for survival at Blackwood Manor. The second was the clandestine struggle for my own mind. My apprenticeship with Jacob the blacksmith became my shield and my classroom. Under the guise of mending plows and shoeing horses, I was conducting a masterclass in mechanical engineering. Every broken piece of equipment was a textbook. Every repair was an experiment. Miller, the overseer, saw only a slave becoming more valuable. He'd boast to Master Blackwood about his investment, how his prize, slave inventor, was saving the plantation a small fortune in repair costs. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed every day. The skills they were cultivating in me were the very ones I was honing to dismantle their world. My thirst for knowledge grew beyond metal and gears. I needed words. Words were power. I knew that instinctively. Frederick Douglass, a name whispered in awe among the literate few, had proven that. He had literally written himself into freedom. I had to learn. The opportunity came in the form of Master Blackwood's son, Thomas Jr. A pale, sickly boy who was often left in my mother's care. He was taught by a traveling tutor, and I'd find any excuse to be near the great house during his lessons, straining to catch the sounds of letters and phonics through the open windows. I would steal his discarded practice sheets, smoothing them out in secret and tracing the letters by candlelight until they were burned into my memory. My mother, seeing my determination, took a terrible risk. She began smuggling out pages from the family Bible, a book they revered but rarely read. She couldn't read them herself, but she knew the shapes of the words held a power she wanted for me. In the dead of night, I would piece together the holy words and the schoolboy's scrawls. Inthebegginning. Each word I deciphered was a key unlocking a new room in the prison of my mind. It was slow, painstaking work, but one day I read a full sentence. It was from one of the boy's primers. "The bird is free to fly." Tears streamed down my face. It wasn't the simplicity of the sentence. It was the magnitude of the idea. The world of letters was a world of ideas, and the most dangerous idea of all was freedom. It was during this time that I first heard the full story of the Underground Railroad. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a real, tangible network of secret routes and safe houses, a river of humanity flowing north. An old man named Moses, who had been on the plantation longer than anyone, told me about it. He spoke of conductors who risked their lives, of stations in the barns of God-fearing Quakers, and of the North Star, the drinking gourd, as the unblinking eye of God guiding the lost. He told me that knowing how to read a map, or even a signpost, could mean the difference between life and death on that journey. My secret literacy was no longer a point of pride. It was a tool for survival. With knowledge came a new form of resistance. It was subtle, a quiet rebellion they couldn't see. A plow I mended would break again, but only after the harvest was done. A wheel would come loose, but only on a road far from the Manor. It was my way of throwing sand in the gears of their oppressive machine, but my true rebellion remained my secret project. In the back of the smithy, I built a small forge of my own, hidden from view. There, I experimented. I was refining the designs for my secret cotton machine. It wasn't just about speed, it was about ingenuity. I designed a system of finer rotating brushes that would separate the seeds from the fiber with far less damage, increasing the cotton's value. It was a complex design, one that would require precise parts they couldn't possibly imagine a slave creating. This machine was my masterpiece, the physical manifestation of an intellect they refused to acknowledge. I formed alliances in the shadows. Jacob, the blacksmith, knew what I was doing. He never spoke of it, but sometimes he would leave a piece of high-quality scrap steel where I would find it, or forget to put away a file I needed. My mother in the great house became my ears. She listened to the conversations of the master, learning of his travel plans, of when the patrols would be lightest. We were a silent conspiracy, a family bound not just by blood, but by a shared dream of liberation. The whispers about me started to change. I wasn't just Elias. In the hushed conversations between the cabins, I was becoming something more. A symbol, the quiet slave inventor, the boy who could think his way out of a cage. It was a dangerous reputation, but it also gave me a strange kind of authority. Others began to watch me, to hope through me. The weight of their hope was heavier than any bale of cotton. The dream of becoming a millionaire was no longer a selfish one. It was a dream of what a free black man could achieve, a beacon for all those left behind. The plans for the secret cotton machine were more than just blueprints for an invention. They were the architectural plans for a new life, a new future, not just for me, but for the idea of us. By 1848, I was 23 years old. The boy who had marveled at broken gears was now a man who understood the intricate mechanics of his own prison, and I was ready to dismantle it. The time for subtle resistance was over. It was time to plan the escape. This could not be a desperate, panicked run into the woods. That was a death sentence. It had to be a campaign, as meticulously planned as any general's. My mind, which had spent years dissecting machines, now turned to dissecting the geography of my enslavement. My workshop in the back of the smithy became my war room. Using a stolen piece of parchment and ink I made from soot and berry juice, I began to draw a map. Not a map of the United States, but a map of my world. Every patrol route Miller and his men took, timed to the minute. The blind spots in their sightlines from the great house, the location of the hounds' kennels, and the precise time of their feeding when they were most distracted. the creek that ran along the western edge of the property, which I knew could mask my scent. I spent months observing, noting patterns, committing every detail to memory before burning the evidence. My work as the plantation's mechanic gave me the perfect cover. I had a legitimate reason to be everywhere, to observe everything. I was a ghost in the machine, and they were blind to me. The next step was identifying allies. This was the most dangerous part. A single misplaced word, a single misreading of a person's character could unravel everything. My first and most steadfast ally was my mother. She was my intelligence network. She learned that a Quaker abolitionist, a carpenter named Mr. Silas, made trips to our county twice a year to trade. He was known to be a friend of the friendless. My mother, feigning an interest in a new rocking chair for the mistress, learned his schedule. He was my first potential link to the outside world, my first station on the railroad. Within the slave community, trust was a fragile currency. The memory of Nat Turner's rebellion in '31, though years ago and states away, was still a fresh wound. The masters had retaliated with unimaginable brutality, killing hundreds of innocent slaves. The fear of that happening again was a powerful deterrent. Many believed that quiet survival was the only way, but I found a few souls who held the same fire in their hearts. There was old Moses, who held the oral maps of the railroad in his head. And there was a young woman named Clara, a field hand with eyes that held no fear, who had a brother who had successfully escaped to the north 2 years prior. Together, we began to prepare. We hoarded food in secret, dried meat, parched corn, stolen from the smokehouse and the kitchens, a handful at a time so it wouldn't be missed. We collected supplies. I used my skills to craft tools for the journey. A waterproof pouch from treated pig bladder to hold my precious designs for the secret cotton machine. And a specially forged knife that was both a tool and a weapon. Clara, who knew herbs and roots, gathered medicinal plants to treat wounds and fevers. We devised a system of signals. A blue cloth hung on a particular washing line meant the coast was clear. A certain song hummed in the fields meant danger. We were building our own invisible network right under their noses. The greatest challenge, the one that tore at my soul, was the question of my mother. She was my anchor, my reason for everything. But she was older now, her health fragile from a life of servitude. A grueling journey on foot through swamps and forests would kill her. I pleaded with her, told her we could find a way, but she refused. Her face, etched with a love as deep as the ocean, was firm. "You are the one who can fly, Elias," she told me one night, her hand on my cheek. "You must go. Your freedom will be my freedom. You go, and you build your future. You become what they say we can never be." She looked at the hidden pouch where I kept my drawings. "You make them pay for what they stole from us. You go be that millionaire." The word sounded like a prophecy on her lips. It was the hardest decision of my life, a choice no son should ever have to make. To leave her behind felt like cutting off a limb, but I knew she was right. My escape was no longer just for me. It was for her. It was for Samuel, for my father, for all of us. My role as the slave inventor was not just to create a machine, but to engineer a future she could live in through me. The final piece of the plan was the machine itself. My secret cotton machine was my letter of introduction to the North, my proof of value. The abolitionists helped those in need, but a man who could revolutionize an industry? He was not just a refugee, he was an asset to their cause. I created a small, working model, a marvel of miniature gears and brushes, small enough to be carried. It was my passport to a new life. The plan was set. I would leave during the week of the Harvest Festival, a time of drunkenness and lax supervision for the masters. I would follow the creek to the main road, meet Mr. Silas at a predetermined location, and from there, God willing, the Underground Railroad would carry me home. The quiet slave inventor, was about to make the loudest noise of his life. The night of the harvest festival arrived, thick with the scent of roasted pig and cheap whiskey. The great house blazed with light and echoed with laughter. It was the perfect cover. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I said my goodbye to my mother in the shadows behind our cabin. We didn't speak. A single desperate hug was all we could afford. Her tears were hot on my neck. Then I was gone, melting into the darkness. I moved swiftly, a shadow among shadows, my path illuminated by a sliver of moon. The map in my head was flawless. I reached the creek, the cold water a shock to my system, and began to wade north, the sound of the babbling water masking my footsteps. I felt a surge of hope, so powerful, it almost brought me to my knees. Freedom was a taste on my tongue. And then I heard it, the baying of hounds, not from the kennels, but from ahead of me, a hunting party, unplanned, unforeseen. Panic seized me. I scrambled up the bank, diving into a thicket of thorns. The dogs were closer now, their barks tearing through the night. Then a voice cut through the air. "Over here! Something's in these bushes!" It was Miller. He was out with the master's guests, hunting for sport. My world collapsed. They dragged me out, the thorns ripping my clothes and skin. Miller's face, illuminated by a lantern, was a mask of triumphant fury. "Well, well, look what we have here," he sneered. "The clever boy. Thought you could outsmart me?" The walk back to the manor was the longest of my life. I wasn't just a failed runaway. I was a failed symbol. I had failed my mother. I had failed everyone who had hoped through me. The punishment was a lesson for the entire plantation. I was tied to the whipping post in the center of the yard, my back bared for all to see. Master Blackwood himself presided. "This is what happens to ambition," he announced, his voice cold and clear. "This is what happens when you forget your place." The lash fell. I will not describe the pain. Pain is a weapon they use to break us, and I will not give it glory by detailing its victory. What I will say is this: with every strike, I did not scream. I clenched my teeth and focused on one thing: the image of my secret machine. The complex interplay of gears, the smooth rotation of the brushes. I retreated into the fortress of my mind, the one place they could not touch. I was a slave inventor, and my mind was my own. They could scar my back, but they couldn't unthink my thoughts. They couldn't destroy my designs. I spent a week in the infirmary, a dark, sweltering shed where the sick were left to either live or die. My mother risked everything to sneak me poultices and clean water. Her face was a landscape of grief, but her eyes held a flicker of steel. "You are alive, Elias," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Do not let them win." The community, too, rallied in secret. A little extra food left by my bedside. A silent nod of support in the fields. They had seen me not break, and in my defiance they found a small piece of their own. The failure had been public, but so had my endurance. My recovery was slow and agonizing, but my determination was forged anew in that fire. The failure taught me a crucial lesson. My plan was too rigid. I had accounted for their patterns, but not for chaos. The next attempt had to be fluid, adaptable. I also realized I had relied too much on a single point of failure, the meeting with Mr. Silas. I needed contingencies. My second attempt, a month later, was born of this new understanding. A massive storm was rolling in, a tempest that would turn the roads to mud and keep everyone indoors. It was the chaos I needed. This time I didn't aim for the road. I aimed for the great dismal swamp, a vast, treacherous wilderness to the north that even the slave catchers feared. It was a gamble, but it was a gamble they wouldn't expect. I slipped away as the first sheets of rain began to fall. But a new obstacle arose. A fellow slave, a man named Cato, saw me leaving. Fear was plain on his face. "They'll kill you, Elias," he hissed, "and they'll punish us for it." He was about to raise the alarm. It was a moment of truth. I didn't threaten him. I looked him in the eye and spoke of the North, of a life where a man's children weren't sold away from him. I spoke of the dream of being something more than property. I didn't mention becoming a millionaire, a concept too fantastical for that desperate moment. But I did speak of owning my own mind, my own work. My dream of a secret cotton machine was a testament to that. In that moment, I wasn't a slave inventor planning an escape. I was just a man begging another for a chance at life. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between fear and hope. After a lifetime of seconds, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod and turned away, melting back into the shadows. He had given me my chance. The storm broke, and I ran. The great dismal swamp was a living nightmare. A labyrinth of black water, cypress knees like skeletal fingers reaching from the muck, and the constant hum of insects. The air was thick, heavy, and alive. Every shadow seemed to hold a predator, be it a cottonmouth snake or a slave catcher's patrol. For days, I was a ghost, surviving on the parched corn I carried and the scant knowledge of edible plants Clara had given me. I was guided only by the moss on the trees and the faint, filtered light of the sun. The swamp was a great equalizer. It didn't care if you were black or white. It would swallow you whole if you made a mistake. After what felt like an eternity, guided by a miracle of instinct and Moses's oral maps, I found it. A small, isolated island deep in the swamp, a community of maroons. These were fugitives, men and women who had chosen the swamp over slavery years ago. They had built a life here, a rugged, defiant existence on the fringes of the world that had enslaved them. Their leader was a formidable woman named Amina, who had escaped from a plantation in North Carolina 2 decades earlier. They were wary of outsiders. They had survived through secrecy and distrust. They took my knife and searched me, their eyes hard and appraising. I knew I had to earn their trust. I didn't beg for help. I offered it. I saw their worn-out tools, their failing fishing traps. I saw the same problems of mechanics and engineering that I had seen my whole life. I spent a week repairing their equipment, reinforcing their shelters, and using my blacksmithing skills to forge new spearheads and knives from scraps they had salvaged. I didn't speak of my grand plans for a secret cotton machine, or dreams of becoming a millionaire. I spoke their language, the language of survival. I showed them my worth, not with words, but with my hands. Amina watched me, her gaze unreadable. Finally, she approached me. "You have a clever mind," she said. It wasn't a compliment, it was a statement of fact. But a clever mind can be a dangerous thing. What do you truly seek, Elias? Freedom, I said simply, and a chance to use this mind for more than just survival. I took a risk and showed her the small wooden model of my invention. Her eyes, which had seen so much suffering, widened in understanding. She saw what I saw, not just a machine, but a symbol, a declaration of intellect. This community, a living testament to Black resilience, was the first real station on my journey. They were the hidden cogs of the Underground Railroad, a crucial link between the Deep South and the networks further north. They allowed me to stay and regain my strength. And it was there that I learned the true meaning of alliance. But it was also where I faced the sting of betrayal. A new fugitive arrived, a man named Jasper, who had escaped a nearby plantation. He was charismatic, with a quick smile and a story of brutal escape that won everyone's sympathy. I felt a kinship with him, another soul yearning for freedom. But there was something in his eyes that I couldn't place, a hunger that felt different from my own. I confided in him foolishly. I spoke of my plan to reach the Quaker networks in North Carolina, of my ultimate goal to patent my invention. I spoke of myself as a future slave inventor, a man of means. The betrayal was swift and devastating. Jasper was a plant, a slave catcher's informant. He traded the lives of fugitives for his own pocket of freedom and a handful of silver. He slipped away in the night, and 2 days later, the slave catchers came. They came with guns and dogs, crashing through the sanctity of the swamp. The Maroons, born of this environment, fought back with a ferocity I had never witnessed. It was a desperate, bloody skirmish. Amina, seeing the situation was lost, created a diversion. "Go, Elias," she commanded, pressing a small pouch of food into my hand. "Run north, follow the river. Don't let them have your mind." I watched as she and her people scattered, leading the hunters away from me, sacrificing their sanctuary for my escape. I ran, the sounds of gunfire and barking dogs chasing me, the weight of their sacrifice a stone in my gut. The preparation for the final leg of my journey was a grim affair. The trust I had naively given was shattered. The world was not a simple binary of good and evil, black and white, slave and free. It was a complex web of self-interest, desperation, and shifting loyalties. My despedida, my farewell, was not to a person, but to an idea. The idea that the path to freedom was a noble, straight line. It was a crooked, bloody, and treacherous road. The only person I could truly trust was myself. The plans for the secret cotton machine in my pouch felt heavier than ever. It was no longer just my passport to freedom. It was a debt I owed to the people of the swamp, a promise to Amina. The dream of the slave inventor had to become a reality, not for riches, not to become a millionaire, but for them. Leaving the swamp behind, I was a different man. The boy who had fled Blackwood Manor was gone, washed away in the black water and baptized in the fire of betrayal. I was harder, leaner, and my hope was now tempered with a cold, sharp pragmatism. My great escape was no longer a single event, but a continuous, grinding state of being. Every sunrise was a victory, every sunset a new threat. Amina's final words were my compass: follow the river. The river was the Roanoke, a winding serpent of brown water that snaked its way northeast into North Carolina. It was my highway and my hiding place. I traveled by night, sometimes wading in the shallows, sometimes scrambling along its banks. The days were spent in hiding, burrowed in hollow logs or high in the branches of ancient trees, forcing myself to stay awake, listening, always listening. The skills I had honed over a lifetime were now my only allies. My understanding of mechanics allowed me to create clever diversions. A vine tied just so to create a rustling in the bushes far from where I was hiding. My knowledge of plants, taught by Clara, helped me distinguish edible berries from poisonous ones. My body, hardened by years of labor, endured what should have been unendurable. The persecution, the pursuit, was relentless. Jasper's information had been valuable. They knew who I was. They knew I was clever. Posters bearing a crude sketch of my face and the words, "Runaway Elias, $500 reward," began appearing in the small towns I skirted. I was no longer an anonymous fugitive. I was a prize. One evening, near the border of Virginia, I was nearly caught. I was hiding in a barn, buried under a pile of hay, when 2 slave catchers came in. I could hear their coarse voices, smell the whiskey on their breath. They poked the hay with their pitchforks. The tines coming so close to my face, I could feel the cold metal. I held my breath until my lungs burned, my body rigid, convinced it was the end. They gave up, their grumbling voices fading as they left. I lay there for an hour, trembling, the smell of hay and fear filling my senses. That night I truly understood that my life was worth less to them than a decent horse. My mind, the mind of a slave inventor, was something they hunted for sport. It was in Virginia that I received help from the most unexpected of sources. I had collapsed from exhaustion and hunger near a small, isolated farm. I awoke to find a stern-faced woman with piercing blue eyes tending to a wound on my leg. She was a poor white farmer, her hands as calloused as mine. Her name was Martha, and her husband had been killed in a dispute with a wealthy plantation owner over a property line. She held no love for the planter aristocracy. She saw in me not a piece of property, but a fellow enemy of her enemy. She didn't offer words of comfort or pity. She offered cornbread, salted pork, and a place to hide in her root cellar for 2 days. "They think they own the world," she said, her voice rough as gravel. "Time someone proved them wrong." It was a temporary, fragile alliance born of shared resentment, another unexpected station on this railroad of desperation. The climax of my journey came at the Ohio River, the final shimmering barrier between slavery and a precarious freedom. It was wider and faster than any river I had ever seen, the River Jordan of the spirituals. Getting across was a monumental challenge. The ferries were watched, the bridges guarded. I spent 2 days scouting the banks, my heart sinking. My plan, my meticulously engineered escape, had no solution for this. And then I saw it, a half-sunken barge, abandoned and rotting. It was a wreck, but to my eyes, it was a chariot. Using the tools I had carried and the mechanical knowledge that was my very essence, I worked feverishly for 1 night. I patched the worst of the holes with scavenged planks and mud. I fashioned a crude rudder from a fallen branch. It was a desperate, ugly thing, but it was a vessel. As dawn threatened to break, I pushed the barge into the current. The journey across was terrifying. The barge leaked, the current threatened to pull me under. But as the sun rose, I saw the other side, the shore of Ohio, the north. I fell to my knees on the muddy bank, the pouch containing the model of my secret cotton machine clutched in my hand. I had done it. I was across. The air felt different, thinner, colder. It was the air of freedom. The dream of becoming a millionaire felt absurd in that moment, faced with the simple, overwhelming reality of having survived. But the slave inventor had used his mind to cross the Rubicon. The journey was far from over, but the great escape, the flight from the physical chains of Blackwood Manor, was complete. The dream of my secret cotton machine was 1 step closer to reality. Stepping onto Ohio soil was not the moment of pure ecstasy I had imagined. It was a moment of profound and terrifying disorientation. I was free from Master Blackwood, but I was a stranger in a strange land, a fugitive with a price on my head, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a secret in a pouch. The journey through the south had been a battle against a visible enemy. The journey into the north was a navigation through a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. This was the true underground railroad. My first contact was a conductor I found through a coded phrase Martha had taught me. "I am a friend of a friend seeking passage." I spoke the words to a black barber in a small river town, my heart in my throat. The man didn't flinch. He finished his customer's shave, then quietly told me to come to the back of his shop after sunset. That night, I was hidden in a secret compartment behind a false wall, my first official station. The barber, whose name was Henry, was a free man who risked his life and livelihood every night. "We have to pull our own out of the fire," he said, his voice a low rumble, "'cause no one else is coming." From Henry's barbershop began a surreal journey northward. I was passed from one station to the next, like a secret message. I spent 2 nights in the hayloft of a Quaker family's barn, where a kind woman named Elizabeth taught me to read a real map. I spent a week hidden in the cellar of an abolitionist minister in Cincinnati, where I read pamphlets by Garrison and Douglas, my literacy finally connecting me to the great, roiling debate that was tearing the country apart. I met other fugitives, each with their own harrowing story of escape. We were a silent, moving congregation, our faith placed in the courage of strangers. The dangers were different here, more insidious. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had made the North a hunting ground. Bounty hunters, or patty rollers as we called them, were everywhere. They were not driven by the ideology of slavery, but by the cold, hard greed of the reward. They saw us not as human beings, but as walking dollar signs. I learned to be invisible, to walk with my head down, to avoid eye contact, to be a ghost. The fear was constant, a cold knot in my stomach. I had escaped the plantation, but the brand of property was still being hunted. My mind, the mind that conceived of the secret cotton machine, was still considered the property of another man. The thought that my intellect, the very core of my being, could be dragged back to Georgia was a new kind of terror. My first real taste of freedom was in Philadelphia. I saw black men and women walking the streets, owning shops, conducting business. It was a sight so powerful it stopped me in my tracks. But I also saw the other side of the coin. I saw the segregated churches, the contemptuous stares, the signs that read "No blacks or dogs." I was free from the whip, but not from the poison of prejudice. Freedom, I was learning, was not a destination you arrived at. It was a battle you had to keep fighting. The North was not the promised land, but it was a battlefield where you could at least stand and fight rather than kneel and endure. It was in Philadelphia that I finally found the courage to show my invention. I was directed to William Still, a towering figure in the abolitionist movement and a key conductor on the Underground Railroad. He was a meticulous record keeper, documenting the stories of every fugitive who passed through his office, ensuring their histories would not be lost. I sat before him, a ragged runaway, and I laid my small wooden model on his desk. I explained its mechanics, its efficiency, its potential. He listened, his face impassive. When I was finished, he picked it up, his fingers tracing the delicate gears. "I have seen men and women of incredible courage, Mr. Elias," he said, his voice filled with a deep gravity, "but I have never seen anything like this. This is not just an invention, this is a testimony." In that moment, I was no longer just a runaway. I was Elias, the slave inventor. William Still saw not just a clever device, but the mind that made it. He saw the potential not for personal wealth, though he acknowledged it, but for the cause. A former slave, now a brilliant inventor and successful businessman, a millionaire even, would be the most powerful argument against slavery imaginable. He saw the same thing I did. My secret cotton machine was a weapon. The quiet slave inventor had found his general. The war had just entered a new phase. With William Still's help, my world transformed. He connected me with a network of abolitionist lawyers, engineers, and investors in Boston, a city that was the beating heart of the anti-slavery movement. They were skeptical at first. A runaway slave with a revolutionary invention? It sounded like a fable. But then I showed them the model. I spoke their language of physics, of mechanics, of profit and loss. I rebuilt my prototype in a proper workshop, using real steel and brass, my hands reveling in the feel of quality tools I didn't have to steal. Their skepticism turned to astonishment, and then to excitement. In 1853, with the backing of my new partners and the legal protection of the abolitionist network, I filed for a patent. U.S. Patent number 9872 was issued to Elias Freeman. I had chosen a new last name, Freeman. It was a declaration. The patent was for a high-efficiency fiber separator. My secret cotton machine was a secret no more. The irony was not lost on me. The wealth of the South was built on cotton, an industry powered by our stolen bodies. Now I, a former slave, was about to revolutionize that very industry. We founded the Freeman Manufacturing Company in Lowell, Massachusetts. Our machine was so efficient it could process cotton 3 times faster than a traditional gin, with almost no damage to the fiber. The textile mills in the North clamored for it. The success was explosive. Within 5 years, the boy who was legally defined as property was a wealthy man. The word that had been a fantastical dream whispered in a slave cabin, millionaire, became a reality. But the money was never the point. It was the proof. It was the power. Every dollar I earned was a brick thrown at the edifice of slavery. The newspapers wrote stories about me. The slave inventor's triumph, they called it. I became a speaker for the abolitionist cause, standing on stages beside giants like Frederick Douglass. I didn't have his eloquence, but I had my story. I would hold up a gear from my machine. They told us we were animals, I would say to the crowded halls. They said we were incapable of complex thought. I ask you, does an animal dream of this? My wealth was a tool for liberation. A significant portion of my company's profits was funneled directly into the Underground Railroad. I became one of its biggest secret financiers. The runaway who once hid in cellars now owned the buildings those cellars were in. I bought safe houses. I funded conductors. I paid for passage to Canada for those who couldn't stay safely in the north. But my most important work was personal. I became a conductor myself. I planned routes. I used my business connections to create new, safer paths. And my greatest triumph came in 1858. Using a network of trusted agents and a small fortune in bribes, I orchestrated the escape of my own mother. She was smuggled north, hidden in a specially designed compartment in a shipping crate full of my own machines. I met her in Philadelphia, at the same office where I had first met William Still. When she stepped out of that carriage, no longer a slave but a free woman, I fell to my knees. We held each other and wept, our tears washing away a lifetime of pain. Her presence was the final piece of my freedom. She lived her last years in a comfortable house with a garden, a peace she had never known. My journey from a so-called slave inventor to a free man was complete, but the legacy was just beginning. When the Civil War broke out, my factories converted to produce equipment for the Union Army. My story became a symbol of what the war was truly about. Not just preserving a nation, but liberating the human potential that slavery had suppressed for centuries. My name is Elias Freeman. I was born a slave. I was told I was property. But a mind cannot be owned. A dream cannot be chained. My story is not unique in its pain, but perhaps it is in its outcome. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder that within the heart of every oppressed person lies a secret machine of defiance, waiting for the right moment to be built. The greatest act of resistance is not just to survive, but to thrive, to not just escape the plantation, but to one day own it. Now I ask you, what stories of resistance and resilience are hidden in your own family's history? What triumphs of the human spirit deserve to be remembered and shared? Honor them, speak their names, share stories of resistance from your family, because in these stories, we find the blueprints for our own freedom.